with the exception of whatever the latest political drama is around Trump, one of the biggest ideas of today's politics is a concept called affordability. Now, the general topic of affordability in the economy is, of course, not new. Probably the most famous um, phrase about that was by James Carville. It's the economy, stupid. And that was back, I believe he was working on Bill Clinton's campaign in the early 90s. So the economy has always been, for obvious reasons, an important political factor. But what we're seeing in the current moment is a certain willingness to tear down the system on both sides. And it's this extreme disregard for some of the core fundamentals of our country, and that have remained relevant for well over a century. People are ready to really throw away the entire system now on both sides of the aisle. And I'm largely talking about populists on both sides of the aisle. But what was interesting to me is when I think about the economy today and I compare it to previous bad economies. I mean, technically, I don't believe we're even in a recession. And unemployment isn't very high. Of course, people mention if the stock price is high, that only matters if you own assets, which is true. But I don't think there's an objective case to be made that today that the economy is noticeably worse than it has been many times in the past. And many of us have short memories. So when we think about the United States in the past, very often we'll cherry pick whatever our supposed most favorite moment was in the past. So we may say, okay, well, things were so great in the 90s, or maybe some people point to the 50s. There's different time periods that different people may like, but there's certainly the Great Recession. There's the Great Depression. I believe that was in like the early 30s, late 20s. And then if you look pre 1900s, I mean, thinking back on conversations I've had with my grandparents, or my great grandparents, being born around the turn of the 20th century, 1900, 1800, most people back then were farmers, right? They were fairly poor. So poverty is not a new thing. And in fact, if you look at human history, poverty is really the norm. And I'm not saying that's a good thing, but just to kind of keep perspective, like having a significant middle class is a relatively new phenomenon in human history. You may credit it to the rise of capitalism. Some may point to the Industrial Revolution. But regardless, humans are quite used to poverty. And I'm not trying to downplay poverty, but I'm trying to understand what makes the political climate today particularly interested and particularly willing to throw away the core system that got us here. There's on both sides of the aisle, there seems to be a clear agreement. And again, talking about mostly the populist extremes of both sides of the aisle, there seems to be an agreement among both sides, the far left and the far right populists, that clearly the current system is bad. Clearly, the way we've done things up to this point hasn't worked. And my initial caution is to say, well, if it hasn't worked, then why does everyone want to come here? Why are we still the top nation on earth? Right. So I like to be very cautious when you start talking about tearing down a system when we are, it's difficult to argue we're not the best in the world. Right. So like imagine you're talking to, Michael Jordan, and you're like, hey, I think you could have done X, Y, Z, and you need to destroy your whole system of practice and how you became Michael Jordan, because I believe theoretically you could have been super Michael Jordan if you listen to me, right? Like you got to be real careful throwing that away. And I would hope that my friends on the right side of the aisle could appreciate that history and have caution around throwing out a lot of what made us successful. So anyway, as it relates to affordability, I think there's actually a deeper problem that is related to affordability. And I think affordability is the more politically correct conversation. It feels more like normal politics to talk about affordability. But I believe that a potentially worse issue is what I may call a fuckability, or the romance issue that young people have today, where they have a hard time getting together, having a place to live, starting families. And I want to illustrate the difference between basic poverty and affordability issues and the romance issues and the meaning issues that people have today. So I want to compare two people. Both are men below the poverty line, right? Who work maybe not minimum wage, but quite near minimum wage, and clearly, will have a hard time not living paycheck to paycheck. So the first person, we'll call him person A. They're the same age. Let's say they're 28 years old. The first person, person A, he can't figure out how to get out of his parents' basement. His city is expensive. To move out, he doesn't think he could find anywhere where he could make enough money to even pay rent and for all his utilities and stuff. It just makes the most sense for him in his mind to just stay at home, where at least he has some minimum level of comfort and space and money for the and things to spend money on for the little that he makes. And he stays there. There's nothing really he can do, and he doesn't have any skills, any training, but he's willing to work. But he can't leave and afford to stay where he's at, and so he's kind of stuck at home, and there's not really much on the horizon to look forward to. That's person A. And then we'll look at person B. Person B is also below the poverty line, but they managed to move out to a low income housing area, and they have it's not a good apartment, but they have a little apartment, and they managed to find a partner to get married. And even though times are tough, they work through it together. They have as many kids as they want to have, plenty of sex, XYZ. So even though both of them are on paper below the poverty line, neither one of them is taking vacations. Neither one of them can buy anything fancy. Neither one of them can afford to eat out almost at all, right? They both are poor, but the difference is person B is living a poor life. He's living life. Person A is waiting to die. And that may sound extreme, but a lot of young men are suicidal. I know plenty just in my friends and family group alone. One, unfortunately, rest in peace, Richard. One of my friends did take his life. So, men don't tend to be the most forthright about our inner emotional struggles because society doesn't really reward us for doing so, no matter how sensitive women may think we should be or say we should be. It doesn't tend to work out in practice too much. So we tend to keep things inside. But there's a lot of men out here struggling. And one thing I like to point out is it's natural for a young man to need some time to get his life together before he's able to attract women, right? Let's say you're 19, you're still trying to figure things out. You don't really have any skills, any income. You're working on a plan. You're trying to figure something out. And to not be incredibly attractive to women at that point is a natural thing. But when you fast forward and you're 29 and it's the exact same situation and there hasn't been any forward momentum and there's nothing in the plans, it's such that you think 39 is probably going to be like 29 and 49 is going to be like 39. At that point, you're just stuck in limbo. Nothing's happening. There's nothing to look forward to. And you're in big trouble. Where the other person, even though the financial situation still isn't looking great, he has a family. He has a life. He has a friendly person to come home to, a partner to get through things with, kids. He's living life. And I think the affordability issue was creating a situation, especially when you look at the housing problem, where young men are having a hard time finding housing in order to be able to date and attract young women. And on the other side, to look at the young women's perspective, they're having a hard time finding good men as well. And so there's basically an issue where both sides are lonely. And if you're poor and you have someone to work together with and you're still making progress on some of the core elements of life, is really not that bad. Now, when I say that, I know being a elitist type liberal, it can feel bad when I say, well, being poor isn't that bad. But I say that not as someone who has no familiarity with it. I'm a black guy, grew up in um, stereotypical black areas, so low income. And I'm not saying that our family was the poorest family, but it was still a low income neighborhood. I had plenty of friends that were on the low end, and we still enjoyed life. We still, now again, we're kids, but we would go outside, play. If you had a ball, you could play basketball, street football, ball tag, regular tag, freeze tag. Simon says, like, there's tons of stuff that, you just go outside and have fun. You create um, your own good time. You don't always need. Now, maybe that's a relic of an older age. Maybe, kids these days, I sound old saying that, kids these days, but kids these days may feel like they require more, smartphones and internet access to have a good time. But um, we, even though, like, not everybody would have the gaming system, not everybody would have the games. Somebody might have the game, and then you go to their house and you hang out. The families there, like the parents, the adults. It's not like everybody was bitter and angry all the time. There was plenty of positive people in the neighborhood. I used to go to various neighbors and talk and hang out with their parents, and we would talk about things, play like word games, etc. And again, nobody had a ton of money, but it was still a community. You still had friendships and relationships, and it's not like all the relationships were bad and divorce rates were necessarily high. Like, they were poor people. They weren't eating out. You didn't always have new clothes. Maybe you had to wear your older brother's clothes as you grew into them. Maybe your shoes, you couldn't replace your shoes all the time, but you played outside, so they ended up dirty, holes in them, and then you got to wait for a while. You go to school and people make fun of you because you got holes in your shoes, right? Like, that's real life. There's clearly no vacations. Like, there's a lot of stuff that you can't do, but it's not like it was miserable. It's not like everybody was hateful. You can live a poor life happily, and again, that's, not being in some large middle class. That's really human nature. Like, we've never, before maybe like the 1900s had a large middle class. So it's quite in our nature to not have excess, to not have excess. So I think it's natural. What's not natural is the very large amount of loneliness that people experience. And I think that's related to the affordability crisis. But if you're poor and you still have a family, and you're actually doing something with your life, then I think there's a lot less appetite to want to destroy the system. Where if you're poor and you're just alone waiting for nothing, that's when things get a bit more dangerous, especially for young men. And again, I think this core issue resonates a lot with people on both sides of the aisle. I think the primary difference is who gets blamed for the issue. So on the right side of the aisle, they tend to blame foreigners. And this could be, there's different levels of blaming foreigners. I think it correlates to the different levels of nationalism. Like, for instance, you have just fundamental nationalism, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. And then you have Christian nationalism, which could be a little more problematic. Not every American is a Christian. And then you also have white nationalism. And of course, not every American is white, right? So there's different levels of foreigner blaming. But, this is why one of the reasons immigration is a large issue. And I'm not saying that there aren't things to improve there, but I think the core message from the right side of the populist aisle is that the people who are responsible for this, for making it so difficult for us to live the type of lives that humans have, basically lived for a long time, where young people get together and have kids and birth rates are relatively high. They blame immigrants. That could be H-1B students. It could be illegal immigrants. It could be anyone who's non-white. Like, it depends on the person you ask, but it's a blaming of foreigners. And on the left, it tends to be a blaming of the wealthy. So you blame anyone who's rich. And unfortunately, Jews get caught in the crossfire where they're foreigners and they tend to be more wealthy than other groups. So they're a common target of both sides of the populist aisle. So I think that's kind of where we are, where we have this fundamental problem, which is not poverty alone. We've been through poverty before without wanting to tear down the system. I don't believe that we've seen birth rates like this, that we've seen loneliness at this scale before. Um, so before, I don't want to go too much deeper into this, but one thing I do want to call out, and maybe we can expand on this in a later video, is I just returned from a trip from China, and when you read the Chinese news, they have almost exactly the same complaints. Now, part of their situation could be attributed to the one child policy that they used to have. But if you look back in the 60s in China, you had birth rates near six per woman. Like six, that's a lot of of births, right? To like sustain a population, I think you need just a little over two. But they're like six. They were at six in the 1960s. Today they're like close to one. Like, so it's really bad. And if you ask why, it's like, well, a lot of it's the same economic issues where you have young people who cannot afford housing. Housing is way, too expensive, and they don't make nearly enough money to be able to afford a place to live. And if you can't afford a place to live, how are you supposed to date? And everything just is stale and stagnant, and young people are having a very hard time getting together. Now, do Jews have a big, influence in China? I don't think so. Do they have a lot of immigration in China? I don't think so. Or is it a bunch of rich people in China? I don't think so. I think that it's and again, we can expand on this in a later video, but I believe that it's a consequence of economics and education, and particularly women's empowerment. And I think that's something that it makes economic sense, and it's the right thing to do, to allow women to participate in the workforce. And with the way the economy is today, and again, this could be a whole video, but I'll just try to summarize briefly. Most advanced economies, most wealthy nations today don't make money with manufacturing. Most wealthy nations make money with services. And to succeed in a service economy, you don't need brute strength. You need responsibility. Basically, you need to be reliable. You need to have achieved some skill that is valuable in the market, and you need to be a reliable and consistent contributor to society. This means largely just being consistent and doing what you're supposed to do. Where if you look back at, when I talk to my grandfathers on both sides of my family, about what kind of work they used to do, is difficult manual labor. It's stuff like coal mining, working in steel mills, throwing heavy bags of salt, driving big trucks full of trees and lumber off the side of a mountain, right? And if some of the trees fall off, you got to get out and like get them back on. We're talking about like difficult physical labor, and this is like before you had good regulations where the only thing that the max weight you can lift by law is 50 pounds. Like, this is before a lot of that stuff, right? So when or just farming, working the land. So when the jobs that most people work to make money demand strong physical labor, men are going to be better suited for those jobs. That's just how it works. But when the economy changes, and you need people with skills and degrees and people who did well in school, men don't really have an advantage. And I would say on average, we have a disadvantage. I think in terms of a responsibility competition, if you're going to pick young men or young women to see who's the most reliable at doing what they're supposed to do, I think young women would always have beaten young men. It's just that was never, before the modern economy, that was never the test of what you needed to actually make a living. So now that women are, especially on the younger side, are outperforming young men in higher education, and they're making a lot of money for themselves. What used to be acceptable for a man when a woman couldn't earn any money was, a man just goes to work, and if he works, he makes a living, and if she doesn't, then he's making more than she is, and it's a strict upgrade to her life to match with that man. Now she can handle her own business. She can buy her own house, right? Which also puts twice the pressure, because if only men are working, then only men are buying houses, and then women come in. But if women are working too, then women are buying houses. They're living by themselves. So there's less for the men to buy. And then it's difficult for the men to keep up and attract as many women. And the women they generally don't need the men, especially on the lower distribution. And when I say lower, it doesn't mean very low. It could be like the bottom 50th percentile, like half of us. Like, I don't know exactly what the ratio would be, but the percentage of men that women are interested in is lower, and the barrier for men to like earn, and the barrier of responsibility is so high that a lot of them aren't meeting it, and so it's difficult for the young people to match. And I don't think that. And I spoke with a friend of mine from the right about this, and his response was quite scary, which was, he said we need to go back to how things were, which is women shouldn't be able to vote. They shouldn't be allowed to work, because it's destroying civilization. We're not even able to have babies to continue ourselves. We have to import foreigners to avoid population collapse, and then our whole culture and everything goes away. I'm quoting him. So he was like, even though it may not be ethical at the individual level, he's arguing that for society. Now, again, it's convenient because he's a man, and he's arguing that only men should be able to get this. Is like the most DEI affirmative action that I've seen, right? Where you just straight up disqualify half your competition. But he's saying that because he thinks that this is the only way to get things back to how they used to be. And to give him a little bit of respect for his argument, it is a new thing in human society for women, especially, to be able to like out earn men economically on average, right? For them to be doing better than us on the economic front on average, this is a new thing, right? So it presents new social challenges. Now, of course, it's the right thing to do. And like, it doesn't make sense to be like, hey, well, let's say you're leading a tech company, and you have two candidates. One of them is a woman and she can code. Another is a guy and he's not very good at coding. Like, to hire the guy just because he's a guy, it makes no sense, right? So it makes no economic sense. It's of course unethical to the women, and I hope we never go back. And I don't think we're going back. And I tried to tell him, like, you can have this dream all you want, but it's not happening, and it shouldn't happen. But it doesn't mean that there aren't new stresses of the modern economy that are impacting some of the old patterns that humans existed within. Those things are new. Those things are gone now. Many of them are gone, and we have to figure out how to exist in this new reality. And instead of blaming foreigners for it, instead of blaming rich people for whatever reason, I think we need to figure out how to achieve some stability without resorting back to caveman like ethics. So I don't claim to have the solution to the problem, but I do believe that the affordability crisis is masking, even though that is a problem, but I think it's masking an actually more difficult and arguably more important issue, which is the romanceability crisis, where people really have a hard time, especially young people have a hard time getting together. And when you lose hope like that, when you're a young to middle-aged man who has no prospects for romance, no prospects for independence, to be able to take care of yourself, and you're just working to survive bare minimum and nothing's ever going to change, you're going to start having some people who are willing to burn down the system, because to them, how much worse can it get? Right. And I'm saying not all of them are suicidal. Some of them actually go to the point of suicide. And, if you're at that level where you're thinking about ending your whole life, you certainly won't have any worries about ending society as we know it. So I believe it is quite dangerous, but I think that to focus on the economy as if it's a normal economic problem that isn't driven, at least partially, by a deeper social issue where young people can't start families, I think we miss the point if we ignore the most important part of the affordability problem, which is the ability for young people to find a place to live and have relationships together.